So welcome back. We'll start off this session on Saturday, 19 January in CSC 343, Digital Forensics. What we want to do today is talk briefly about assignment 1.3 and 1.4. The 1.3 assignment is designed to be kind of a familiar task. If you've been in my courses before, I usually ask people to explore a topic in the discipline that appeals to them, to find an online article from a credible source, a peer-reviewed journal or an online magazine, um, and then to read it and then relate a simple paragraph about its contents, a second paragraph about its relevance, why it's important. Essentially, what we've done is simplified this assignment from previous seasons. So it's a 2-point assignment, but basically it's framed the same way. I'll be scoring your submission based on the following 4 criteria. Selection of a qualified article. Qualified article has to do with digital forensics, some aspect of forensics, whether it's written in proper English, are there complete sentences? Is the grammar and spelling cool? Is the punctuation good? So please do use a grammar and spelling checker, right? Are there 2 complete paragraphs? Paragraphs need to be developed sufficiently. There needs to be, at a minimum, a topic sentence, about 3 or 4 supporting sentences, and then a closing sentence, right? And then, of course, at the top of the page and at the bottom of the page, you have a title and a reference. Here's a sample from a previous season, just to refresh the trail. We're interested in your own language. You don't have to use fancy vocabulary or sophisticated expressions, but do mind the grammar and spelling checkers, right? So that's due by 11:59 p.m. this Saturday. Any questions about the article summary?
No
And
questions.
welcome to those of you who are joining us in progress. All right. The solution, essentially there's a PDF, and what we want you to do is to work a series of tasks to prepare your own client, your own personal technology. Now, in the wonderful world of technology careers, you can split the world, the digital universe, in terms of hardware into 2 broad categories. Okay. So once again, we're talking about hardware, devices, systems, network equipment, all of that, right? Servers. Essentially, you can split the digital hardware universe into one of 2 categories: client technology, whether it's consumer or business, whether it's personal or workplace oriented, doesn't matter. It's the individual client, the individual user. So the device is intended for a single purpose. The other half of the universe is on the systems and server side of things. So if you have a piece of equipment that is providing a service, or it's a system that provides data to multiple users, that's the server kind of thing. So we talk about client server in other classes. We talked about client server and networking. This is something that should be familiar to you. You will have a chance to engage a forensic baseline on the virtual system that we will stage for you shortly after we take your licenses and implement those systems. And that's happening, that's playing out this week. So that's why we need the 1.2 assignment to be completed. If you haven't done that yet, please submit. You can still submit today. And then what we want you to do is to use your own personal technology as a way to catch a glimpse of what a client baseline would look like. And your own personal technology may be in good shape or it may need attention. But if you follow the tasks here, you'll clean up some things, you'll reset some defaults, you'll make some changes. And then what you'll end up doing in the end is, after it's all over and done with, restarting your system and then capturing some images of your screen in Task Manager for a baseline level of activity when nothing else is open, before you open web browsers. If you have a BitTorrent client running, let me say this again. If you have a BitTorrent client running in your system tray, you're going to want to disable that specifically, because what we don't want are artificially high levels of activity, and you submit that and oh, you log credit for it, but one of the remarks added to your score is, holy buckets, man, what's going on in your system? Because when we get to the Wi-Fi part, if you're running a BitTorrent client, your system could be used at any given moment spontaneously to serve up a variety of digital content available on your system. So that's just one of the, so the first part of this solution is to basically run some quick maintenance tasks and to clean up on aisle 6, make sure that things are in good working order, right? And you might want to check your baseline the way it is before you start the process. This is just a suggestion, but a good one. On your own personal technology, open up the Task Manager performance option and click on each of these before anything's running and just kind of see what kind of activity is customary. And then go ahead and work through the tasks in the order listed. And when you're done, you go ahead and capture that baseline again in Task Manager. You'll just be capturing these screens. And what we want to do is understand what's normal when your system is healthy. So each of those tasks is worth a point. And essentially, this is the document you need to reference, okay? Now, it is 3 pages long. Some of these things do take a little bit of time. If it's been a while since you've optimized your personal technology, this is something that is not terribly unfamiliar to most of you. So everyone should be operating on 22H2, whether you are in Windows 10 or Windows 11, unless you're in a Mac system, in which case you're operating with Ventura. Ventura. Okay. Any questions? It talks about the network aspects of this, firewall rules, MAC identities. Why would you care about MAC identities? Well, if you don't know what your MAC identities are as a part of your baseline, and then all of a sudden, here's another device on your network, and it has a different IP address, but the same MAC identity. What does that mean? Quick. This is the network forensic side of things. Okay, you got 3 seconds. I'm going to count down. If somebody doesn't answer, you're all like failed in this course. 3.
Could you repeat the question first?
Yeah, okay. MAC identities. Why do you want to document the identity of each of your MAC addresses, the media access control identities or addresses for each one of your network interfaces? Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Ethernet. Why would that be important? Well, let me give you a scenario. You are looking at your local network with a simple tool called Nmap, and you discover there's another device with a different IP address, but it has the same MAC address as your machine. What could that mean?
That someone's cloning your MAC address.
Somebody is spoofing or cloning your MAC address. That is correct. That is one reason why you do this. Establishing a baseline is no good unless there are specifics. What about your DNS server? Your DNS server in your network configuration, what does it mean if the local DNS server is not listed, but some other public IP address somewhere else? And you do your homework. Oh my gosh, you find out it's not the DNS servers that your ISP recommends. What could that mean? There could be DNS poisoning going on. It's a redirection to DNS records that are modified, and it's a fake DNS server. And when you click on your bank IP, you enter first, or you enter Banco Popular, or you enter Bank of St. Croix, or you enter Oriental. You're not connecting with your web browser to the real Oriental website, the real Bank of St. Croix website, the real Wells Fargo website, because there's a different network server in the mix. Your system has been hijacked and there's a man-in-the-middle attack in progress. That's what it means. Okay. And these commands are particularly important because both of these show you external connections. Last season in the systems, which course was it in? One of our courses, we discovered that basically there was an attack in play from Moscow, Russia. Were any of you in this class at the time?
That was I think it was Intro to Cybersecurity. Yeah.
Yeah, we did some things and then we looked at Netstat and all of a sudden we found out, wait a minute, there's
Yeah.
something weird going here, and we backtraced the IP address. So these are things that are relevant. If you have a Netstat connection to an external server and it's open all the time, it could be that you're running Edge. Because believe it or not, Edge likes to work every mouse click and keystroke entry for their web browser through their website first before it goes out on the internet. That's right. They capture all of your web client activity for posterity, presumably for efficiency and security purposes, so that they can, provide quicker responses for the browser. I'm just saying, right? So if you're using Edge and that's your default browser, and yeah, there could be some services, there could be some plugins or stuff that are there. Browsers are problematic at times. Anyway, if that's normal because you set up something, it's good to know what's normal. Okay, finally, you're going to do a GRC Shields Up scan. Everybody's familiar with GRC Shields Up, right?
Yeah.
And everybody knows that if you get blue or red squares in the GRC Shields Up, that is not necessarily a reflection of holes or activity on your machine, but it could involve holes or activity on other machines. In particular, if there is a firewall that is active on your wireless router. So you have a network firewall on your wireless router in most cases, and then you also have a firewall that's active on your local host. So then you would want to do some things to see if those port exposures continue. You could disable your local host firewall. You could turn off the wireless router firewall temporarily. You could see how the results change, but it gives you a starting point. And what you should see is what? Anyone?
Green.
All green. Absolutely no blues. Absolutely no reds. Okay. Well, you want to understand profiles, and in particular, when you get to the regedit part, you're going to want to go inside the registry and capture some stuff in there. One word of caution. You don't want to make changes in the registry unless you know what the heck you're doing. But you do want to understand what these acronyms mean. You're going to click on the start menu, click Reg Edit. It used to be that there were two different versions you had to worry about. You don't have to do that now. I would run this as an administrator just because you always want it to work. I'm going to go ahead and scroll all the way up and start from scratch. When you begin your review of your Windows registry, there are a series of, they're called hives, I believe. Registry is composed of a number of hives, and H key LM means H key local machine. So sometimes there are abbreviations, right? When you see HKLM, that means HK local machine. Let's go back to our reference. We're going to HK local machine first to software. We expand that. Then you'll find Microsoft, expand that. Then Windows NT, then current version, then profile list. I'm going to open this. Then what? Software. Then I'll find Microsoft. So I'm kind of reversing and redoing it. Microsoft, then Windows NT, current version. Windows NT at the bottom. This just says Windows. Windows NT, current version. See, if you're in the wrong place, it'll cause a problem. I'm going to expand that. I see current version. I'm going to expand that, and then let's see here, current version, and then profile list. Now, if they've moved the cheese and profile list is in Windows, then that would be one thing we'd need to update. I'm glad we're looking at this. Windows. Let's look at Windows. Windows current version. Well, I know they didn't move this so far out of here that it's completely different. Okay. Yeah, they may have done that to enhance security. Does anyone recall our demonstration of this in Windows 10 last semester? Anyone?
Yeah, I've seen it. Like we've done the walkthroughs before with this.
HKey logo machine. Not sure what this source is, but I'm just going to check the first thing. This is how to change the user file profile name. So sometimes you end up with a weird user profile folder name when you're adding a third-party account. What do we mean? When I set up this system brand new, I established my Microsoft Office, my personal Microsoft Office 365 account to establish a login, the first login, the administrative login. I did that for a variety of reasons. I'm kind of testing some things. I'm not a fan of third-party account setup. I like to use local accounts. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's what I did. And you'll notice how this is worded. That's the name of the account I set up. When I logged in the very first time, the profile was built for me. The screen says, oh, hey, this will take a minute. You've probably seen that before, yes?
Yep.
And this is what it created for my profile folder name, TC Ken. Sometimes, depending on the third-party email address you use to establish your first account, remember the first account exposure is usually like really bad. I have created a second standard user account on this system, but I haven't logged in yet, so you don't see another user profile. In any case, it took that account that I gave it, and this is what it set up on my C drive for a folder. That's what the article is talking about. But at the very least, it'll give us a chance to understand, well, it's showing us how to do this within user accounts. And then going into user properties. And then, okay. So yeah, we can do this with command line, but where's the registry and interest? Profile list key, that's what we're looking for. Can everybody see this? Computer, H key, local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, NT. Where did I go wrong? Probably right after software, Microsoft. Let's go back. So this is something that often happens when you're in the registry. So H key current user? No. H key local machine. Could it be I was fishing in the wrong pond? Yeah, it could be. Microsoft. Did any of you notice this and you just weren't going to tell me? You're kind of chuckling to yourself right now. Once you select, I want you to notice what happens up here. So I'm in H key current user, but I haven't chosen Microsoft within software. So now the path changes right here. I'm looking for what next? Software, Microsoft, Windows NT. I got to go all the way to the bottom. There it is. Windows NT. When I click on Windows NT, now the path up here changes. I click on current version. Now the path changes. Now I open up current version. I'm looking for profile list. I click profile list, but I want to open it up. Here's the point. When you look at the profile list, these three are defaults. This has to do with your system, with services, and with network. Those are normal. But there's another one, when you click on it, what you should see is the path to user profiles. And you should see one for each of those. If you have more than one of these, and you go into your accounts, and you're looking at other users, I have an M. Snengelfart account. Mortimer Engelbert Snengelfart was a friend of mine in high school. He was picked on ruthlessly by our peers. Long story. I created a local account not associated with a third-party login. It's a standard account. It's not an administrative account. I have not logged in yet. The moment I do, I should see, if I see this here, and I don't see this here, if I don't see M. Snengelfart here, it means one of two things. I either haven't logged in with that local account, or it means that I have an account that's established and whoever was using it cleaned up after themselves and deleted their profile so you couldn't tell what they were doing on their machine. Hello, did everybody just hear what I said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how could you tell whether or not that's the case? How could you tell if somebody actually did use the account, established a backdoor account, right? And they can establish a different account using a variety of methods. They can go into control panel and set up an account in control panel in the users option, right? They can do that, manage another account. They can go into the settings and do this, and then go into other users, right? They can set up stuff for, they can add like an email, like there's all sorts of weirdness that they can do. But the point is that there's one other resource on your machine where you can check to see, is it really the case this has never been logged in? How many times would an extra account unknown to you be on your system, and then when you go in here, you don't see it? The first thing I would want to do is manage my computer and look at services. So another thing you can do is to show more options, select manage. Now the computer management console opens up. You can look at logs. You want to look at Windows log. You want to look at the system log and the security log. What are you looking for there? Anyone? You're doing forensics?
If I'm not mistaken, we're pretty much looking for their, we call it, not their ID, but pretty much we're trying to look for this specific number that basically tells us that somebody logged in or they tried to log out from the event viewer.
It's called the login event ID. A successful
Yeah.
login would be Windows event 4624. So yes, you're correct. You can basically go into here and then you can filter or search for that explicit login ID. And then you can also look for failed logins, failed login attempts, right? But if you find a successful login attempt and all of a sudden it's M. Snigglefart, but you go here and you don't see M. Snigglefart, what's going on? Well, whoever M. Snigglefart is on your system, they could be doing some things they're not supposed to do. Okay. Another thing that can happen is that you detect it. You detect it in the registry editor. So you detect it here, and there's an extra profile. Oh yeah, there's an extra profile, and it has a long SID. And then there's a profile image path, but it's not in here. Which means, wow, somebody created an account, somebody deleted the account, somebody deleted the user profile, but here's an extra breadcrumb in the profile listing. So these are things you want as a part of your benchmark. I mean, that's the reason why we're doing this. You come back 3 months later and you have stuff you can't explain, that is a serious problem. Any questions? Hard disks, partitions, and cloud drives. While you have computer management open, you can select disk management. Has anyone ever been in disk management before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you want to benchmark this? Well, if you come back and you find out 3 months later that 2% of one disk is free, you're going to ask yourself, this is a terabyte drive. What was I doing? I mean, I don't remember collecting a terabyte worth of data. I only have 2% left. I'm talking about drive letter D here, right? I have 895 gigs free on my D drive. If I come back in 3 months and I have 10 gigabytes free and it's redline, that's serious. What about hidden partitions? Perhaps the size of a hidden partition changes on unexpectedly or without explanation. Those are things that are important to capture as a part of your baseline. That's the next to last task in your solution. And the final task is system and device operating levels. That's the snapshot and task manager. Now, I want everyone to see this. I invite students to do this for extra credit. They don't always do it. It's like, okay, I'm just happy to get this done. But you can receive additional credit for removing all unused or unknown applications. Now, why am I calling this out? You'll get a whole different baseline, and you could find out if you do enough of this, wow, there's a lot of crap. There's a lot of junk running in my system tray. It's slowing my stuff down. If you unload a lot of extras in your apps, also in control panel. So you want to go into here and look at this. And if you don't know everything that's in that list and you're like, what am I doing with this? If you can't identify everything that's in that list, I would say you have a problem. And you have a bigger problem if you don't deal with it, right? So you would select something and you'd say, yeah, I don't know why I have so many redistributables and a lot of them are really, really old. Well, if you loaded an old game, that would be different, right? If you know what it is, you're fine. Where else do you check? This is one place where people don't. They check the control panel for that, but then they don't go into settings and do apps. Because Microsoft got weird. Well, all right, so it's not weird. They wanted Windows 10 and Windows 11 to be really cool with a Metro interface. It's called Metro user interface. I'm not sure if that's the latest, greatest term for it in Windows 11. I chose to put mine not in the center of the taskbar, but toward the left, because out of habit for Windows 10 for so many years, I'm just used to going to the lower left-hand corner. I can do this, but the point is that there are apps, right? And the installed apps, I can look and say, okay, well, that's Microsoft, and I need that for what I'm doing. What else is in here that I don't ever use? Yeah, I actually do iTunes because, I don't know, I have an iPad and I'm kind of a old iPad fan. I used to have an iPod. I had an original Generation 1 iPod when it first came out. It was so cool. But you'll find things that are installed here that are not listed in the control panel under programs and features, right? And you probably want to pull the category, change the view by category and do this, and then go straight to the programs and features. Any questions about your opportunity for additional credit? So if you remove unused or unknown applications before you do this stuff up here, before you do the first 5 steps, if you remove, what am I saying? Oh, the opportunity for additional credit isn't that much work if you do this before you start the 5 tasks you are required to complete. So any unknown user accounts, any profiles on the hard drive, right? If you have other tasks associated with additional maintenance on your system, like, I don't know, updating your drivers because they're so outdated, yeah, or Windows updates, right? So if you do all of that before you do the 5, it's easy to claim the additional credit. It's very easy to claim the additional credit. So you do the task manager before, then you do the additional steps for additional credit, then you work the 5 required tasks, then you have the before and after, right? And sometimes you can see a dramatic improvement in performance. If you don't see a dramatic change in performance and you've removed all kinds of junk and you've done the optimizing your personal technology in step 1, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. you should consider wiping your system to bare metal and reloading Windows from scratch. It's like getting a whole new system. And then you get a very clean baseline. If anyone is like willing to announce that they've been through the extra stuff and they've even done the extra credit, and wow, my system is still kind of barfy, and you know the hardware you have is decent. You have at least 8 gigs of RAM, you have a multi-core processor, you have halfway decent graphics, your hard disk is an SSD or better, but it's still slow. That's a telltale sign that you could have what's called a kernel level exploit on your system. What am I saying? You do, where are we here? This. And after all those tasks, without running anything at all, your CPU says 3%, and your disk says 0, and your network says very low. But all the lights, the disk activity lights on your system are blinking like a Christmas tree. And the fans are always blowing. And your laptop is hot, or your PC is hot. What does that mean? You have malware and it's embedded in the kernel, and that is actually modifying the output of this utility so that you don't think anything is wrong, and you're a danger to yourself and everyone on your local network. That's what I'm saying, okay? Now, one of the things we want to do in this class is call out conditions where, irony of ironies, here you are getting educated on really cool digital forensic stuff, and you're using your own personal technology, but you're clueless. And or you're not willing to do anything to make it right before we start everything else in the semester. So you're rolling the dice with a wild card with your personal technology. Now, yes and no. You will be using your personal technology for some tasks, but I'm going to recast a lot of the assignments and solutions in this course so that you can also use the virtual system on our new platform. So I just wanted to share with everybody, well, I'm hoping that in this class, there are some students who take it the rest of the way, and then they make a personal decision. Okay, am I seeing like an amazing change in my system performance and speed, or wow, do I need to reload my system? Okay, we go through this all the time. And then a lot of students at that point shrug their shoulders and they go, I'm gonna get a new system next year. I'm like, okay, so you're gonna limp along and you know something's wrong. Wouldn't it be nice if you're learning like how to tell what's really going on in your system in a forensics class, and then that leads to changes that are good? I'm just saying, in principle, wouldn't that be like demonstrating the authentic value of forensic capabilities and knowledge? Wouldn't it be ironic if it didn't? Just saying. Okay. Any questions? Is everybody still with us?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still there.
Okay, cool. I'm going to take a two-minute break, and then we're going to dive into some more content. Okay. And then we're going to blitz to the finish line and cover as much content as we can. So please make sure that you get started with the last assignment in module 1 and the solution. And if you run into any snags or questions, please don't hesitate to check in with us. All right, I'm gonna hit the pause button right now and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Everybody stand up and stretch, take a breather. So in our previous session on Tuesday, we stopped here and called out a specific point about the Fourth Amendment. You know, there is a reasonable right to privacy and to protection from unlawful searches, right? And this is a part of our American legacy. It does require some obvious accommodations when you're working digital forensics. And there are cases where when people don't, that can cause a real problem. I'm going to try to blitz through most of the high points in the slide. If all of the pages of textbook in the first two chapters and selected sections after that are basically summarized in a couple of bullet points on some slides the author provides, those are really important details, right? So in addition to the content of the study guide and the study guide addendum, anything in the references folder, you should be digging in, you should be reading independently some of this stuff on your own, right? And you can't depend on my capacity to cover every important point when we go into the module assessment. You might see some things in the module assessment that are in the slides we didn't explicitly cover in class, or some points in the study guide we didn't explicitly cover in class verbatim, right? Just want to be fully transparent about all that. So when you're considering a broad overview of digital forensics and what it involves, we've already told you that there are other related disciplines that in the mix with digital forensics, and data recovery is a huge one. So that's worth calling out. In addition to all the personnel management and other stuff we mentioned in previous sessions, the ability to reclaim data that has been intentionally deleted or accidentally destroyed, those kinds of skills are paramount in digital forensics, right? So they do work with investigators, and they have this idea of the investigations triad. So if you consider incident handling as the front line of digital forensics, the first responders who preserve the digital evidence, right? If the stage is set preemptively where you have evangelized digital forensics, you have sold it as a concept, and there's been some basic education, awareness, and training with all your users, right? Then when incidents occur, your users are a part of the team, the IT staff on the help desk is part of the team, right? You have network professionals who are looking at the logs in their IDS systems and firewalls. You have the risk management vulnerability threat assessment. So you have people that say, well, what's really most important to our business is our trade secret, because most of our money comes from customers who come to us because of the way we do what we do. And it's patented, and we have a process that's different. It could be a restaurant, it could be something simple, it could be something very complex, right? It could be that encrypting with ransomware the healthcare records of a hospital, wow, would that cripple a hospital if everything was digital and they didn't have any paper records? That would be a big fat risk management challenge, right? And we've talked about risk management as a part of Intro to Cyber, right? The digital investigations piece is the most prominent of this triangle, right? So when you're looking at what is digital forensics in a nutshell, it's really the post-mortem what the heck. And I did play up in a previous session that part of the most underrated and undervalued part of digital forensics is your ability to assist on the front side for preventive purposes, right? Right, something like that. You can use digital forensics in an innovative manner in concert with information technology to identify early emerging problems so that you don't have as many post-mortem investigations. That's not part of your textbook. That's just a comment I'm making from 25 years of experience. So these three aspects kind of work together. These are some landmarks and some well-known tools. The Forensic Toolkit was an open source product and it has since become commercial. This is a pattern that repeats. There is a version of open source forensic tools that law enforcement use. And the professionals that developed it gave it up. And so it's only version 11 and it's from 4 or 5 years ago and it's still useful, but it's not supported and there aren't any continuing like patches and fixes and bug, updates, that kind of thing. So that's a problem. But everybody see this right here?
Yes.
Yeah. Death and taxes are the only two things that are certain in life, so it is said. A huge driver for digital forensics are like taxes, because the IRS is actually rewarded and they get bonuses and they get more money when they bag people. And so they just get bigger and badder and stronger. And this is an interesting notion that this part of it would drive forensics. So what am I saying? Let's say you have somebody who's very good at crime and they're very affluent, but they don't have any like obvious sources of income. Following the money is a huge part of tax evasion prosecution. And it's also a huge part of the digital forensics process. Oftentimes, if you can't figure out anything else, you just follow the money. Follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. In the early 1990s, the profession of digital forensics started to get serious when associations formed. And so one of the earliest was the International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists, IACIS. That's a milestone in the history. So those are things, this is a huge challenge, is that existing laws can't keep up with the rate of technological change. And when statutes don't exist, case law is used. What's case law? When a decision is rendered in a court, that decision can stand in place of a law. So you can cite a landmark court decision. It's called precedent, legal precedent. That's another term for it, case law or legal precedent. As digital forensic professionals, you need to understand the most important court rulings, especially when it comes to search and seizure. It's kind of like snagging the yarn on a sweater. When you get serious with digital forensics, you'll run into a situation where you need to dig deeper, and that means grabbing stuff that people don't want you to have. So there are search and seizure rules that click in, right? Another association, the Computer Technology Investigators Network, right? So these are useful things to understand. Digital investigations fall into two categories, and this is also in your study guide. But then we break down the public sector investigations into like two additional categories. So we go to the trouble of taking one of these two primary categories and splitting it again in the study guide. Please watch for that. Okay. But basically, on a broad scale, you either have private investigations, internal, anything involving a government agency is public by definition. Why? Well, because government agencies are by the people, for the people in most cases, right? So you can have lawsuits, and those are private investigations because a company or a corporation wants to prove its case in a lawsuit, or you can have public cases, especially where criminal law is concerned. And whenever you get public, a lot of US federal requirements start to come into play, like restrictions against search and seizure or wiretapping, right? There are aspects of email review or message traffic that's considered wiretapping, like in old-timey phone bugging? Does anybody know what wiretapping is or heard the term wiretapping?
Yeah.
So the original protections against wiretapping, you have to have a court approval to bug somebody's phone, to monitor somebody's phone line. Same kind of thing is true for electronic communications, not necessarily by voice, old school telephone, right? Most modern digital forensic folks don't even think about that, but it's a legacy that has continued because email and text is another way of communicating. And if somebody's monitoring your email or text messages, they better have court approvals or they may have problems on their hands. There is a due process that needs to be followed, right? Private sector investigations focus more on policy. Policy is like the internal law, rules and regulations of the organization, the local organization. But private sector investigations often focus also on, well, sometimes if policy isn't in the mix, it has to do with personnel management issues. So you can have organizations where their policies suck. They just don't have them. They don't have effective policies, or they have them, but they don't follow them. They don't practice them. So in that case, you're not dealing with digital forensics having any value with policy violations. You just have digital forensics activities to protect somebody's hide because, well, somebody did something wrong to someone else. Any questions so far?
No questions.
I think we covered in Intro to Cybersecurity, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in 1986. But then you need to understand that state laws were also adopted. So you have federal and then you have state. Which takes precedent, the federal law or the state law? And that's a trick question. I'm telling you right now, it's a trick question. Which do you think needs to be followed? Let's say you have a federal law like this and you have a state law that's separate and different. Which one do you think should be followed more than the other?
Both simultaneously?
That is a good answer, both simultaneously, but in particular, if one is more stringent than the other, it's the stronger, more stringent or more restrictive law that counts. So what are we saying? If there's a federal law and it's strict up to a point, or there are penalties up to a point, and then there's a state law or territory law where there are stronger restrictions and more severe penalties, those trump the federal, and each can be prosecuted separately. Have you noticed in the press that Donald Trump is having lots of problems in the state of New York? I don't know if you've noticed. Anyone?
Didn't notice that.
Yeah, there's a lot in the news about it lately. Donald Trump is having all sorts of headaches with his with state laws and statutes. He's been caught and prosecuted. He, his company, and his family have been prosecuted in the state of New York. Whether or not that's going to play out where it's successful and there are actual penalties, we're not sure yet, but that's in progress. And it's important to understand how those different jurisdictions interact when you're doing digital forensics, because digital forensics is on the cutting edge of when you're investigating someone, everything's on a hair trigger. So that's one aspect of this you really need to pay close attention to. Let's see if we can pick this up a little faster here. So sometimes you have random log reviews that result in an investigation. There's something peculiar going on a network or on a system. But a lot of times there are witnesses or victims, and they raise a flag. And that is one aspect of digital forensics that's always there. So what am I saying? You not only have preemptive cases, but much of digital forensics is reactive. We already said postmortem, right? So they write up this crime, and then essentially there's an investigation that's started. One of your greatest challenges is finding out how best to work with law enforcement. And it is true that many law enforcement professionals are not the most gifted digital forensics professionals. And they will try to get you to do them a favor. See, because they can't tamper with evidence, but if they tell you something has to be and you end up doing it, you have to know the boundaries, and you have to be able to assert those professionally even with law enforcement. You can get law enforcement that will tell you, no, you don't have access to that computer. And you're like, if we don't preserve this evidence, you're destroying evidence. How about if we refer you to internal affairs? Are you working with the perpetrator in this environment? You have to be able to stand your ground if law enforcement is out of bounds, especially as a digital evidence first responder, right? Meaning you're first on the scene. Here's a bungling detective that doesn't understand. He's like, we're just going to take this with us. So he starts jerking cords out of the wall. You're like, all right. So there's a chain of command, and I need to talk to your supervisor because you're destroying evidence. And if you don't stop right now, this is going to escalate in a very unpleasant way. Believe it or not, there are proper ways to work collaboratively with law enforcement where there are checks and balances, because sometimes it's important to exercise those checks and balances. You have to be confident in your craft to know when and how you should be able to say, okay, I need to raise a flag, you know? And those are dynamics of the discipline that are worth mention in our introduction, right? Affidavits are sworn statements. You have to be able to stand by something. And oftentimes an artifact you collect, a digital artifact you collect at the scene, becomes what's known as an exhibit. That artifact becomes evidence. There's a chain of evidence. You have to be careful about how you do that. Those are all aspects of when the stewardship of digital evidence becomes important. Now, is that important in only public criminal cases, or is that also important in private corporate cases with lawsuits? What do you think? Do you have to worry about the chain of evidence for private corporate cases where you're a digital forensic specialist?
Yeah.
Yes, the short answer is yes. Why? What's going to happen in a lawsuit if you don't handle the chain of evidence the same way?
The opposing or the defense could argue that the evidence is faulty or corrupt.
Correct. They can discredit your record, and when the exhibit is turned into hamburger in front of a jury, you don't have any credibility and you lose the case, right? Excellent. So yeah, this is just more information about the nature. This is huge. Email harassment, embezzlement, sabotage, industrial espionage, falsification of data is huge. When people are altering digital records to get out of trouble, you have to be able to find out, okay, this database record was changed by this employee on this date, and they logged in here on this machine. That's huge. Gender and age discrimination, there are all sorts of reasons, but one of the things that's, and I hope they mention it, and if they don't mention it here, they'll probably mention it elsewhere. Whenever this kicks in, if a lawyer in a lawsuit goes to a court and says, we need that digital record, the defending person or organization is compelled to provide it. That's called e-discovery. And it's huge and it's costly. And it can ruin a company, because if you don't produce the evidence, like, okay, I want all of your email that was sent to and from this person. Well, hell, that involves email in other people's inboxes. And what happens if that person deleted a bunch of stuff? Well, there are still copies of that email elsewhere in that organization, right? Does everybody understand what I'm talking about here? Let's give you an example. What prevents me from sending new email to an administrator at UVI and tell them they're a dirty, rotten scoundrel and I don't like them and they're incompetent and they shouldn't have a job at the university and blah, 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 blah. And then I send it, and then in my sent items, I delete it. Does that work?
No, because the person who you sent it to still has it in their inbox.
That's right. So email in particular is a thorny issue because you have extra copies of email in other mailboxes, and sometimes e-discovery triggers in the collection of other email in other mailboxes. That can open a Pandora's box of ethic proportions. Let me say that again. E-discovery, where, okay, some people are getting creative about how they delete their email, right? Can lead to a horrific and terribly costly process where everybody else's email now becomes part of the investigation out of necessity, and it's court ordered. So if you show up in court and you don't have it, you're in violation, you're in contempt of court. So how do you think your case is going to go? Right? Not very well. Any questions? All right, we're going to try to get through these 8 slides and then we're done. So line of authority. Line of authority is a necessary part of digital forensics. You have to know. We were just talking about cases where law enforcement are trying to assert things and you have to push back because I don't know. Believe it or not, some law enforcement is inept and they're unprofessional. And maybe they're not really that good at law enforcement, so they don't do the right things or the correct things. Yeah. So how do you escalate with a line of authority? Under what conditions can you exercise? You have to know who to escalate with. Escalation is part of it. And if you don't know that, you don't accept that, you're in the wrong line of business. You can avoid litigation, but this is also not true. So there have been cases where people have a warning banner. This is a great thing to do, though. Oftentimes, businesses protect themselves from private litigation. That means having to go to court and getting sued because they put a warning banner on their computer screens every time it's in there. Every time somebody gets on the screen or they access the network, they see something that says, this network is intended for this company. And if you're on here and you're not supposed to be, you're in trouble. And it informs the end users, hey, we can inspect our computer systems and network traffic because we have to, for efficiency purposes, for support, to protect the data integrity, all that kind of stuff, right? Those are critical things. So here's an example of this, right? These are good practices. And guess what? You'd be shocked to know, as a digital forensics expert, when you go to some places, they don't have this. They don't do this. Use of the system is network, right? You want to make sure that these components are part of your banner. You have to establish what's authorized and what's unauthorized. You can have people in the same organization who are authorized to access the screen and the system to a point, but not past a point. If the people you are serving don't have clear lines of boundaries about that, that can be extremely problematic, right? And those are things to understand going into it, right? Who has access? one thing that should never, ever, ever happen. The people who collect the money or the revenues should never, ever, ever be the same people who pay out the payments to cover expenses. Why? Anyone? Why? What is the problem if the same people who collect all the resources for an organization are also the same people who are empowered to pay the money out? What do you think happens more
They're
often?
biased.
Say again?
They're biased.
Oh, they can be biased. In fact, they've become so biased, they become biased to themselves. They start creating fictitious companies and they write checks to themselves. They start playing a shell game with the money. It's called separation of duties, right? So these are things when we talk about authorized, who is authorized to access which data, which systems, and who is authorized to initiate and conduct digital forensic investigations when bad things happen, right? There's a lot of parallels between private and public. The thing to understand is that there's deep, dangerous water in both of those pursuits. And a public, one of the things that you must understand is that the moment a private investigation involves a crime, a felony crime, it could turn into a public investigation very soon. Meaning it's criminal, then law enforcement gets involved, right? And then from there, who knows, right? So especially if there are government contracts involved. Let me say that again. Wherever there are government grants or government funding, the use of government funds and government contracts, if there are crimes that are committed and the digital evidence leads back to the agency, a private investigation for a federal contractor can quickly become a public investigation of stakeholders in the agency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the distinction between personal company can be difficult, especially in the BYOD environment. We did talk about this already, right? Haven't we?
Yeah, we have bring your own device. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think a company smartphone ought to allow TikTok?
Not from what you told us, no.
I'm glad that something stuck. Okay. So we'll talk about professional conduct next Tuesday, and we'll wrap up our review of content for the module as quickly as possible. But remember, we want you to try to submit your first results for your solution by when? Everyone? When? 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 When?
Tuesday, right?
Tuesday. Right. Okay. Any questions before we close?
No questions.
Okay, so today we covered student learning objectives associated with a range of topics and common challenges that degrade or affirm forensic capacity and remedies. Distinguish between formal levels of forensic activity and the types of forensic investigations. Outline ideal scenarios to prepare for a forensic engagement. That's what we did in the previous class, right? But we revisited that today. We've covered some landmark court cases and legislation, like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, related network forensics to system forensics, and in terms of common tools like event logs, right? So we're kind of jumping around, but we are covering a range of learning outcomes. We'll wrap up as much as possible on Tuesday so that you can engage your first attempt of the assessment. We might push this back to, we'll probably push this back to Thursday. But we're going to try to finish reconciliation and retake by the end of the month, regardless. Okay, that completes our class for the day. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye for now.